The last thing you want to do when a client calls you and says, Mom passed away is, how big is the estate? Yes, we have deadlines. You have to remember, I think at first just want to talk to you. Why don't you blame your lawyer? Blame me. If you want to talk about it with your child, say, we were sitting with our attorney and she said it might be a good idea to handle your inheritance this way for these reasons. You can think of trust as a Tupperware. It starts off as empty. You can open the lid, you can put things in it and close the lid again. I was able to get $60,000 extra dollars to come into the hands of the beneficiaries because a third person had prepared an income tax return after someone passed away. There was a feeling that I had to be a certain person to succeed as an attorney. And I quickly found that wasn't the right approach. When people say be yourself, I think that's what they're talking about. And that's why I talk about my path, because I do think it helps others significantly.
This is The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. My guest today is trusted advisor to high net worth individuals and families navigating the complexities of wealth transfer and holds a Master of Laws in Taxation in addition to a JD. Beyond her technical mastery, she is a leader in the legal community, having co-founded the Arab American Bar Association of Massachusetts and being recently named an emerging women leader in the law. It's my pleasure to welcome Nina Dow to the podcast. Welcome, Nina, and thank you for being here.
Wow, what a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Nina, as you know, I love to start each of these conversations with asking my guest to share either a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be and what is it?
Well, given that I had a hard time coming up with a cringe joke, I'm going to go with a fun fact.
Please.
For 200, please. So the fun fact is that I used to be a film major in college.
Ooh.
For a short amount of time.
Oh, that's fascinating. Actually, are there any lessons or things from what you learned back then that you apply or that you think are valuable in your practice or just in the in your professional work?
I think filmmaking and starting out as an attorney when I did a little more than a decade ago, they're both financially difficult when you're trying to get your start. So for those reasons, they're similar in that regard.
Got it. That is really cool and speaks to your breadth of intellectual capabilities and interests. So that's fascinating. And that's a great segue, I think, into my next question, which is I think that every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast is a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story. I'd love to learn yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I was saying that I went to law school later in life. I was actually 27 years old when I went. And before that, I attended Emerson College, which for those of you familiar with that school in Boston, it's geared toward the arts. And I wanted to be a film major, and that was the place to be. And my parents, who immigrated to the U.S., weren't thrilled about my choice of that major because they, preferred other fields that were more secure, so to speak. I did listen to them in part, and I ended up switching to marketing and spent time before law school working at advertising agencies. And it was, again, in my late 20s where I decided I wanted to be a lawyer because I thrive on dealing with complexity. And I realized how much I was stimulated by that. But that's not a typical path you see, with lawyers.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And, thinking about complexity, I mean, tax planning, I would assume, is as complex as it gets in terms of the various elements.
Never thought I'd even incorporate tax either, Aniket. And a lot of people don't know this. So in law school, I loved law school. Toward the end, I started to enjoy estate planning. For those of you who've taken trust and estates courses, I absolutely loved it. I loved the professor. And I didn't realize just how tax heavy it is, too. And he sat me down in his office one day and said, if you're really serious about a career in estate planning, you should consider getting a Master of Laws in Tax. And I told him, well, really, I mean, that's another year of school. It was expensive, too. A lot of people have student debt from law school, which I'm happy to talk about how to get rid of that soon, because I did. But it was worth doing because, and it's what I call fun tax. People think of, when you picture a tax lawyer, you're thinking maybe an older person, white older male with a bow tie sitting in a dark office. And that's not really what it's about. It's really about, wow, everything you do, including what you do in estate planning, could have tax implications. And it's very fact specific. We're talking about making gifts to people. Who would have thought it's the holidays, you're making a gift? Depending on what it is, there could be tax implications. So that involves income, estate, gift tax, and believe it or not, a generation skip. If you give funds to someone who's in a lower generation than you, then there's a tax there too. So it's all embedded in fun facts.
That's fascinating. So I think you shared, it's very interesting to me to learn about the significant link between estate planning and taxation. But what drew you to estate planning in the first place?
I think that, first of all, if you ask my friends and family, they'll tell you I'm not really a fighter. So that, litigation, I knew I wasn't going to be able to represent clients zealously because I don't like arguing. Estate planning is so client and human centric. I found I'm good at connecting with people. I think that just comes from my cultural background and how you're raised, in those cultures. It came easily to connect with people, but it's not as emotionally heavy as some other practice areas like matrimonial law, and which also has a heavy litigation component to it. So for me, it was like the perfect mix of having connection with people, and also you're not in a adversarial position when you're talking with clients, and also just giving them the peace of mind. A lot of people, when they sign their will or trust, big sigh of relief. And they're so grateful. Thank you, Nina. We feel so much better that we did this. Or another part of my practice is dealing with people who are deceased, helping families wind up the affairs. That can last as long as 2 or 3 years. And people are very grateful to say, wow, you made this process so much better. I was grieving. And I'm happy to talk about what that entails as well, because you are dealing with someone's passing. And people aren't usually in the best frame of mind to listen to what you're saying about what we need to do and complicated explanations and things like that. So I try to be very mindful of that when people go through things like this.
Yeah, let's actually talk about that, because that was one of the things I wanted to touch base with you on, which is how does it work with regards to the emotions that people are having, these very human emotions, with the passing of a loved one, but then that grieving individual or that family has to square that with sort of the hard numbers that are involved. So how do you square that circle with your clients?
It can be difficult because when I'm talking with colleagues, and when I was growing up, in the industry as an associate and worked closely with a partner, behind the scenes, we're saying, okay, what's the estate value we need to know, because there's going to be a tax return due, an inheritance tax. So it's very technical. The last thing you want to do when a client calls you and says, mom passed away, is how big is the estate? Rushing into these technical questions. Yes, we have deadlines. Yes, but you have to remember, I think at first just want to talk to you. Keeping that in mind, there's a list of things we need. We need a death certificate. We need income tax returns. We need their copies of their estate plan. You don't want to be on that first few phone calls and shoot them a list of things they need to do. Just have to be mindful of that. Some clients beg you for that. Tell me because I want to get my mind off this. So they're happy running around and getting us the information, and they're happy being technical about it because it takes their mind off the emotional part. So I think it's really important to, and if it helps to ask, say, what would you like to discuss now? There are a lot of things to do, and then see what they want to do. Let them kind of lead you in the beginning. I think that's important to keep in mind.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Um, one of the things that I noticed when I was looking you up is your phone bio mentions a preference for simplicity
Yes.
whenever feasible. And so can you please share a little bit more about that? Because on the one hand, earlier you shared in your background that you enjoy complexity and yet you
Yes.
have this preference for simplicity. So can you help us understand what that means?
Yes. I love complexity. Clients, not so much. So I like to, and I've developed a knack for explaining things at a really, you can explain anything in such basic terms. Clients who are engineers, PhDs, they say, I want to get more technical, Nina. I'm happy to do that. But most clients get very overwhelmed if you're just going to really talk about the tax code, for example, in an in-depth way. I like to use analogies. When we talk about the gift tax exclusion gifting rules, there's a difference if you give me a gift and I can use that gift now versus you give me a gift, but I can't touch it for a while. And I use the analogy of those who may observe Christmas. I could see a tree and a gift under it, and I could tell you that gift is for you, but you can't open it until Christmas morning or whatever it is, versus here it is, open it now. That's actually explaining how certain gift tax laws work, So using things like that, I found easier. Sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat. If I'm faced with a problem, there's usually a simpler way to do it for clients than a more complex way to do it. And when I say that I prefer simplicity, I always mention that as well as the complex and give people the choice. But I have to credit that to one of my mentors who I worked closely with for 5 years. And she was extremely practical. And just even by listening to her on the phone talk with clients about how to solve problems, I picked up that skill of there's usually a very simple, practical way to handle something, and it doesn't have to be necessarily fancy. And clients appreciate that.
That makes sense. Um, you know, as part of the work that you do, I would imagine that there's a good amount of complex family dynamics in at least some of those matters. So, and some of these things can be sort of just under the surface, simmering. What's a key strategy that you use, Nina, to manage some of those relationships and ensure that a family has the best overall outcome, even though and especially when the stakes can be quite high.
I think in an estate planning context, one thing that comes to mind is, maybe clients come in and they've got children and they know that children are not going to be big fans of what the parents are doing in their plan. Children may not get their inheritance outright. It may be given to them over time for many reasons. And confidentiality is really an important tool because I tell clients who are nervous about this, no one is entitled to know what you're doing in your estate plan unless you tell them. And I'm not discussing it with anyone until you give me consent that I can. So that makes them feel a lot better, in that circumstance. If they ask me, well, I'm worried about my child getting a huge sum of money all at once because they might get divorced, because they don't know how to manage their money, because they may have substance abuse issues, they may have gambling issues, whatever the case may be. Sometimes if they're worried about a child's marriage or the child is engaged and about to be married, I tell them, has your child considered a prenup? And they just say, we don't know how we would even mention that when my son or daughter is so in love. In that circuit, what has helped and what clients like is I tell them, why don't you blame your lawyer? Blame me. If you want to talk about it with your child, say, we were sitting with our attorney and she said it might be a good idea to handle your inheritance this way for these reasons. And that takes the pressure off the parents a little bit. That's one way I've dealt with family dynamics in that regard.
That's great. That shows a great level of sensitivity and sort of putting yourself in there and letting all the emotions sort of be directed to somebody outside of the family, which is obviously just
Mhm.
just easier for everybody. While on estate planning, let's talk about the biggest misconception that you see many clients have when they first come in, when they're maybe not sure of what they should do. What do most people get wrong about what it is, who it's for, and when they should start?
I think a big misconception is, well, I'm not wealthy, so why do I need an estate plan? You should always just talk to a lawyer and see if there are really good reasons to have at least a basic plan, which often is the case. And you don't need to be wealthy to have problems. And we've seen that because remember, I help to administer estates. And sometimes it's very messy and we're sitting there thinking, gee, if that person just saw a lawyer, family would save a lot of money and headache right now. Ownership of real estate. It could be a house that's not even worth that much. One home could cause a lot of issues depending on family dynamics if it's not properly taken care of. I see a lot of litigation surrounding real estate. So lack of wealth, why should I do that? I'm single. I'm not married. Why would I need a plan? Even more reason if you're not married, because you need to think about who's going to get your assets if you're not legally married. People think that if they're receiving government benefits, they don't need a plan. That's a massive reason to talk to an estate planning lawyer. There are ways you can kind of have the best of both worlds. If you're a beneficiary on government benefits, if it's set up the right way, you can still inherit funds, but keep your government benefits. So Googling, even in a medical sense, if you Google my back hurts, you're going to get a lot of myths out, so people ask me, well, I could just do this online. You could, but it's like you're asking Dr. Google. I mean, how effective is that? To me, it's a pretty good analogy. So that's what I would say.
Makes sense. One of the things I was looking at is that you've written about what are known as domestic asset protection trusts. For listeners who are business owners and or who have significant assets or not, based on what you just said, can you briefly explain what these are and why they're useful and for whom?
Certain states have let you set up a trust, and you can think of trust as a Tupperware. It starts off as empty. You can open the lid, you can put things in it and close the lid again. And in some of these states, they allow whatever you put in that Tupperware to be out of the reach of creditors. And of course, nothing comes without some downsides. Oftentimes you have to release control of that Tupperware. So states have certain statutes that if you just follow A, B, and C, there's a good chance that your assets could be protected. And that was a very big topic in 2014 when I chose to write about that. There was a lot of lawyers were studying it, so I thought it was a good opportunity to write about that topic. I believe Delaware has that statute, and I believe New Hampshire as well. But that's all that it is. In the law, just keep in mind that if you have too much control over something, then you own it. And if you own it, there's tax implications and there's creditor implications as well.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Thank you for simplifying that for me and for our audience. That was great. One of the other things that is mentioned in your bio is that you also do business succession planning. And so I would imagine that it's a different set of emotions from, say, the passing of a loved one, etc. But what's sort of the hard conversations that you need to have with a business owner who's ready to transfer the wealth, but still is reluctant to transfer control?
Well, that's a huge thing also. I've also found that to be cultural. Speaking from personal experience, I grew up with a family business. My father was it, and he was not ready to, only he could do it, right? So I struggle with that with clients. Oftentimes, they can't think of anyone to give the business to because the kids aren't involved. The spouse is not involved. That's a really big conversation. Or, well, one child is involved, but I have this other child and there's unequal now distributions. How do we make each child equal? That's another big one. You have to be careful with business planning if there are other partners that aren't a part of the family. Because if you don't plan and the business owner dies and by intestate laws or through the estate plan, the spouse gets it, how do your business partners feel about being in business with your spouse or your child? So business succession planning needs a lot of thought and care, but business owners sometimes don't want to make decisions. And that's where we get stuck. Well, I'll deal with it. Or I feel great. I'm going to keep going, I think, another 10 years. Well, by the way, did you remember that you're 85 years old? That you can go for 10 years. My father's 103, and it could happen. It could happen. But that's an anomaly. So business owners, start to think about this now. Even if you started your business yesterday, you never know what could happen.
Very interesting. Without getting into the specifics, can you share one or two examples of complex matters that you worked on with some some of your clients that really led to the best possible outcome for at least your client or the other parties involved?
Oh, I feel like that happens every day. It has happened for me where I was able to get 60,000 extra dollars to come into the hands of the beneficiaries because a third person had prepared an income tax return after someone passed away. I don't know how in tune the listeners are to the theory of step up in tax basis. So if you and Aniket owned Apple stock and you bought it in the 1980s and now you go to sell it when you're living, you will have a huge capital gain because they're going to take the market value of the Apple stock, subtract it from when you bought it in the 80s. But if you didn't sell it and you died owning the Apple stock and your beneficiaries inherit it and then turn around and sell it, we forget about the 1980s purchase price. And your new foundation is your fair market value at the date of your passing. So they're inheriting that stock. If they were to sell it, they're going to really minimize capital gains. In this case, the preparer of the returns forgot to elevate that tax basis. And once I caught it, talked with them about it, the return was amended and there was a massive refund of 60,000 coming back into the hands. I don't know about you. I would love $60,000.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And it's a small, you really imagine how carefully you need to look at, and you just never assume that anything is done properly. Even us, we always have a second set of eyes with whatever we're doing. So the family was extremely grateful for that catch.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think it goes back, Nina, to what you mentioned about not just relying on like a search engine or like
Right.
AI tool or whatever to sort of do this. Because I don't think, you should not be putting your, your confidential information into one of those tools, and B, it would not catch the level of nuance and detail that you did, which is great.
Well, there's a lot of talk on how lawyers can use AI. I'm scared to death about that. I'm not even clear on how it could. I know it can summarize documents, but confidentiality is an issue, and I'm not altogether clear about how AI can help us. So maybe that's another podcast session.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I have an AI, some document summarization analysis.
So it works.
It works, and and it obviously depends on the nature of the tool and the quality as well as the confidentiality. And so that, I would say that those are things that are very important, and that when you're choosing a vendor, you should obviously look at all of those things. But yes, we can certainly have a separate conversation.
Right, it's a whole other episode.
Exactly. Nina, this is great. I would love to now take it back to sort of some of the things that you've done in your profile. And I want to go back to a question that you offered to answer when we were talking about your background, which is the student loans and the student debt. So obviously with, that's a real factor for anybody going through, any sort of higher education, but especially law school. So yeah, I would love to hear, for the benefit of especially our earlier career attorneys, how you navigate it.
Oh, it was really hard. It graduated in 2012. The market was not great for new lawyers. So I got the LL.M degree immediately. So I technically was done with studies in 2013. The market was still bad. And for estate planning, those of us who wanted to do that, larger law firms had chosen not to have that practice area anymore, the mega firms. So those practices were found at what we call boutique law firms, smaller firms, usually outside of the big cities. And when I approached them, my friends and I, who all were kind of in the trenches with this together, they sat us down and said, "Do you have a book of business? Do you have clients?" No, I just started, Okay, well then, if you don't have that, do you have at least 5 years experience? No, I don't. And so it was really hard to get the initial position as an estate planning associate. Some people just chose to work at banks and private wealth groups because they were looking for lawyers, but you're not practicing law in those situations. And I knew I wanted to practice. So the only options I had really was to, I didn't make a ton of money. So it was, if you really want to learn, okay, but this is what the salary is going to be. And I think my first salary was $60,000. It always helps when you tell a friend and they say, gee, my daughter gets that doing data entry and you're a lawyer. These are hard statements I heard, and you start to question everything. But if people out there feel like they're in that situation, I do think the market's much better now. It's worth it to just do it and to learn yourself to death. And then have the foresight to know I'm going to do this for a couple, really cut my teeth and learn. And then maybe 2 or 3 years, you can look at other opportunities and just kind of grow that way, you know? So at that time, there was really no other option than to just get in there and learn and make financial sacrifices. And even during that time, I was living with my parents. And again, going back to culturally, that was very acceptable, Eastern culture. In fact, they love it because then you can be a little bit of a caretaker in your spare time and they need things done around the house.
Oh, yeah.
But also, that's also when I strengthened my cooking skills for sure. But that's how I, paid off my loan initially because I was paying a mortgage payment. I remember it was $1,650 a month, every single month. And I managed to wipe them out in 10 years. And of course, when I got higher paying jobs, that helped. But when you have a 6.5 to 7% interest rate, you don't want to let that sit. And when COVID came around, I don't remember if you recall, but they paused interest on those student loans. And I paid zealously. I did not stop paying during those months. And that's when it started to eat into the principal. And so I urge younger attorneys, if you're in that situation, take advantage of anything that would let you pay down the debt sooner. For me, that was a golden opportunity that they froze the interest rates. I mean, that was like a gift from above, because it ties you down. I couldn't buy a home at the time, and some people are fine just paying a little bit over time. But I knew I did not want to be in my 70s still paying law school loans, So it's just about the discipline, doing whatever you can do to wipe that.
That's great. As you were sharing that, Nina, a couple of things came to mind based on some recurring themes throughout our conversation here, which is your sort of strong cultural background, and then the guidance and the mentorship that you're providing sort of in this podcast to especially our earlier career audience. So let me take the second one first, which is I understand that you were recently named one of the emerging women leaders in the law, which is wonderful. Can you share for us what that means, and what does that mean from a mentorship perspective? What sort of advice would you give to other, leaders, women leaders who, or future women leaders who would like to eventually take on a career trajectory similar to yours?
I think that I was, and I've learned through the struggles of, building my career when the market was so bad, that it really helps to be authentic wherever you are. I think, again, I don't want to, I don't want to put too much emphasis on it, but there was a feeling that I had to be a certain person to succeed as an attorney. And I quickly found that wasn't the right approach. And when people say be yourself, I think that's what they're talking about. And that's why I talk about my path, because I do think it helps others significantly. And when I joined my current firm, I immediately began to mentor associates there. And I think word got around such that when me and a couple of other friends in the Boston area decided to create the Arab American Bar Association of Massachusetts, I joined the mentorship committee. And I think that was evident to people in the community. And that's why I was a recipient of that award. I have people calling me all the time asking questions like this. How did you do this? I'm looking for a job. What kept you going? I'm having a hard time finding one. How do I pay down the debt? My parents don't like this area of law that I'm doing. How do I get around that? Dealing with family issues. We talk about in our culture, the pressures women face because you're expected to be a superwoman sometimes. You have to be a caretaker sometimes, but you also have to deal with the demands of a law firm. How are you going to be faithful to both? Because your culture demands that you are family oriented and helpful there. But also, it's when you join a law firm, you have to be 150% committed. also. We've had panels about that. How do we deal with the balance? So my advice to the younger attorneys out there is to really, really be yourself. That'll open up for you to be connected to others. And by my doing that, happy to share my story as a mentor. I don't think I can mentor effectively if I'm hiding the struggles I went through. It's just really hard to do that. So for the sake of that, I think it's important to be vocal about what you've learned from mistakes and how you can grow from there.
That's amazing. Thank you, Nina, for sharing that in such an authentic manner. One thing I wanted to make sure I touch upon was, can you please share with us your path towards co-founding the first Arab American Bar Association of Massachusetts? So what need did you see in the community that made you feel like you needed to build, you needed to put this organization together, and sort of what are some of the activities in addition to those that you mentioned that the Bar Association does?
I had always, it had been in the back of my mind, but I never really, did anything about it until I had known someone in law school who was of Arab descent. And then someone I grew up with in the area, who's also a lawyer, was talking with him, and she approached me and said, would you like to be a part of this? We haven't started it yet, but do you want to be a part of the first group? And I said, oh, of course. I'm so glad you said that, because there's no way I could do that by myself. So that's how, and I think it was 6 of us at the time, maybe 4 or 6 of us, who I still remember huddled in a conference room in Boston, starting from scratch, little by little. And our official launch was September of 2023, where we brought Juliet Kayem, who is Lebanese American, as the keynote speaker. And now we have about 100 members. That's pretty good for just having started up so recently. And we're very good about continuous programming, webinars, and also social events throughout the year to get the community together. And like I said, we do have a mentorship committee as well. So I get a lot of phone calls and people reaching out, asking for help. And because when you share the same cultural background as someone, there's a lot in common there. There's a lot in common. So I think people feel more comfortable talking to us about their things that they're going through.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because with similar cultural backgrounds, there's a lot of things that can be understood without having you can leave things unsaid and still understand the other person, which is great. And then you can identify with some of those challenges or struggles better, because maybe some version of them is something that one went through oneself. So that's awesome. Nina, this has been a great conversation. Let me ask you one more question, which is that for attorneys who are maybe they're in law school or they're fresh out of law school and they have an interest in estate planning and taxation, and they're thinking about potentially following a similar path to you, what resources or advice or guidance would you recommend for them?
A few different things. I think that they should seek out people in the community, such as myself and others, who are willing to guide them. I think that's very important, because they should also think about meeting with people who can help them determine their strengths and to maximize those strengths. If you're someone who, like me, you enjoy people, not only will that, just to use an example, help you narrow down what practice area you should be in, because you should maximize your strengths. It also could help you, attract clients, which can be very, very important for the attorney and also the law firms that they're at. And I think the more you talk with people and look for mentors, I think your life will be a lot easier. So don't just kind of isolate yourself and think you can solve everything on yourself. I think you should talk with people about what you're tking.
Don't be that business owner who thinks only they can do everything and they have the answer to everything.
Exactly. Don't be like my father.
It sounds great.
In that regard.
Well, Nina, this has been a wonderful conversation. Final question for you. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
How do I take my coffee? Because that has changed.
Oh, okay. That would be another episode, because I have a whole set of opinions on that, but I would love to hear yours.
And don't drink as much as I do. It's not that good for you, but I can't help it. But going back to the mentor I had at my other firm, I always drank my coffee with milk. She drinks it black. I drink it black now. That's how strong that mentorship was. And now I can't even think to put milk in my coffee.
Oh, yeah. I'm a milk and coffee kind of guy. Milk and espresso, so like a latte. So Yeah, well, I mean, that's the power of mentorship, where you take on, you listen to them so much. I guess
You
you have
start
so
to pick up that.
start to pick up their habits.
So I'm a double espresso person, no milk for sure.
Well, espresso, at least it's espresso and not, regular black coffee. So, maybe we have something in common.
Yeah. And sometimes it is regular blacks. Thank you
Definitely.
so much, Aniket, for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. No, Nina, this has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your insights, your candor, your authenticity, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.